It is the 1st of May, and getting into many conversations that we will have in this month. It is Kenya's biggest conversation. This is the Situation Room, and we will be having a conversation today at this hour looking into workers' issues. We know that on this day, many things are said. It's a national event. People come out and we hear certain things. We'll let you know around that conversation and what it is that we will be speaking about today. Our two guests already joining us in the studio this morning, and we are of course interested to hear matters to do with minimum wage and how that all is carried out, and who then will make sure that this is actually it's realized and it is actualized. Our two guests in the studio this morning are in the persons of Rose Omamo, who is the executive board member of COTU, and Jane Njoki, who is a member of the COTU Kenya Youth Committee. Ladies, good morning to you both.
Good morning.
Good morning, and karibu sana. So today is Workers' Day, but what we do here every day with our guests is that even though you're in the hot seat, we welcome you to the Situation Room with a proverb. CT goes around the African continent, and he lands on a different country every week, and he will tell us what the proverb is, and we would like both of you to interpret that for us. Okay? All right.
We are in the People's Democratic Republic of Algeria. This is a country with a rich history. Now, it's not the only country in Africa that has a rich history. Every African country has a really, really rich history. Mm-hmm. The northern African countries, if you look at history, what they call antiquity, you'll find that these countries collectively helped and brought about a lot of development in the Mediterranean countries of Italy, Spain, France, for a very, very long time. Long time here is not decades, centuries. And there still are remnants of the civilization that they helped bring to those regions. That does not mean that once you have brought development to others, you can solve your own problems. This continent is rife with issues. Algeria has their own issues, but that's not what we're going to discuss. We're going to look at their proverbs. Today's proverb. This particular proverb, I liked it, especially on a day like this. When I think of others' misfortunes, I forget mine.
When I think of others' misfortunes, I forget mine.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can translate that proverb. And I can relate it to what workers do. When a workers' representative goes out to represent workers and to speak to workers, it doesn't mean that they don't have problems. They have their problems, but they have people's interest. They put people's interest first. So if you have your problem, it doesn't mean that you now sit down and say, because I have my problem, let me live in the book of Lamentations. It tells you that you have to go out and speak for others, even if you have a problem. Yeah, I think that really speaks to that proverb.
Oh, you've given it beautiful context. Yeah. Yes.
And what about you, Jane?
I want to concur with my sister. To add upon that, the issue said, as a worker representative, when you're going to negotiate any issue of a worker, you don't go with your issue. You go collectively discussing on a collective perspective. So with that proverb, when you're going to negotiate, you go collectively, not on a personal level. Yes.
That's it. And I guess, that forms the basis of, a conversation that we have this morning, then in terms of what representation is. And when it then comes to workers, when it comes to minimum wage and workers' welfare on a whole. So when we do this every year, sometimes we imagine that we only come and remember it come May 1st, and then what happens from May 2nd until April 30th, But those are now things that we're going to look at today. And let's start off with you, Rose. When we talk about minimum wage, let's just look at the nitty-gritty, shall we, in terms of details, in terms of what is prescribed, what is the minimum that workers should be earning, and then what are we doing to safeguard and protect, and to then start to build on that, and in what sectors are we playing? And I'll tell you why in a little bit, why I'm asking that, but let's start off with that.
Yeah, thank you for your question. And when we talk of minimum wage in Kenya, we talk of looking at the sectors like production, we're looking like transport, we're looking like all other sectors that are not covered by collective bargaining agreement. We have the agricultural sector, those that are covered by collective bargaining agreement, and those that are not covered. Why? Because there are other employers that have not recognized trade unions, and as such, they have workers whom they pay a meager salary that does not even meet their needs as workers. And I'm saying that this category of workers are not workers on the collective bargaining agreement, because workers on the collective bargaining agreement has a negotiated terms and conditions of employment, where they speak of wages, they speak of health and safety at workplace, maternity protection, annual leave, and such like things. But workers on minimum wage are vulnerable workers. They are either employed by very disturbed employers, very disturbed, who does not care what they pay. For example, you'd find an employee who earns 10,000 Kenya shillings. So what do we do as COTU? COTU then lobbies for minimum wage adjustments every year so that their salaries can be raised to a certain bar. And what does COTU do then when it comes to minimum wage? We have a wages council that brings together the government, the Federation of Kenya Employers, and the Central Organization of Trade Unions representatives. So COTU sends what we call a demand proposal, saying, like, for this year, we want a minimum wages to be raised by at least 30% or so. Then the employers would also come with a counter proposal to counter that. Then the workers, the bargaining council will then sit and deliberate on this. COTU would justify why they want salary increment. Of course, the employers will never buy that idea because they want to defend their businesses. And then the government then comes in. Then it is left to the president, who is also a worker number one, and who will then decide, what do I give to this vulnerable category? And it is categorized into cities and into other counties. So you would find that it varies from one city to the other. It is all, it actually provides a bare minimum of what should be paid to a worker. But it also provides a platform to those that have collective bargaining agreements to do when we are negotiating, where is the bottom line? Where can we base our argument? And where can't we go under, So it is mostly for the vulnerable group that are not covered by collective bargaining agreements.
Okay.
So we talk about, minimum wage in the country, which currently is at 15,201.65. And we also recognize the fact that previously President William Ruto gave a directive that a minimum wage be increased by 6%. But that has been a problem because, FKE had issues with that, saying it is not tenable, it is not affordable. So even as you negotiate on behalf of workers, making sure that they have their situation gets better, but the implementation phase is lacking. So how should a worker look at that and believe that COTU is able to push that towards the implementation phase?
First of all, when the president declared a 6% salary increase, truly, as you have said, there were issues to do with gazettement of this 6%. And COTU sits in the National Labour Board, where we advise the cabinet secretary on matters pertaining presidential decrees, matters pertaining law in general. And so when there was that back and forth of advertising or gazettement of this 6%, COTU came in very strong and said, you cannot violate or you cannot defer what the president has declared. And as such, there was formation of the gazettement of the Wages Council Committee that then sat and gave approval to the gazettement of the 6%. Coming to implementation of 6%, it is always a challenge with some employers who do not want to implement even what is gazetted. So what does COTU do? As I told you, COTU is a voice to the voiceless. And COTU would come up to confront these employers, even though they are not members of COTU or members of a union, but COTU speaks for all workers. It's a voice to the voiceless. So COTU makes sure that the Ministry of Labour is informed to make sure that such employers are inspected and action taken against them. Because once a gazette notice has been out there, the employer's responsibility is to implement and not to argue about it. So COTU still speaks for them. COTU speaks for everybody. COTU has a department that represent workers even up to the Employment and Labor Relations Courts, workers who are not members of a trade union. It is our role and responsibility to represent these workers effectively, regardless of whether they are members of the union. In terms of advocating for workers' rights, it is our key responsibility. Whether the employers do not want it or not, because the employers would always want to maximize their profit. Yeah? But for us, we advocate for decent work and decent wages.
So what sectors, I mean, you talk about those that are out, all of those who are outside those who have been, protected or essentially by collective bargaining agreements. And so oftentimes we sit, Jane, and we have conversations about, okay, so then if a minimum wage is this amount, there are those who may be in a domestic setup. There are those who, are under where they say, this is how much we pay. We are not under the law in terms of what is required to be paid as minimum wage. So who then falls within these sectors whereby this minimum wage must be realized?
Thank you very much for that question. She started by saying that the minimum wage, especially it specifically covers those people who are informally employed, and majority of them, you have said, the domestic workers, the security sectors, the plantation, those people who are in informal sectors, those people who are guaranteed by collective bargaining agreement, that those people who are formally employed, like the civil servants,
yes,
those in parastatals, those in government, those are the people who now gets to sit down and negotiate for their salaries. But those people who are now covered with minimum wage are those people who are informally, they're in informal sectors. They don't have anybody to negotiate for them. Or when they have a union, that is where COTU comes in, negotiate for them. They bring out the issue of the minimum wage, and they're covered in that sector.
You know what, Njoki? The majority of people in this sector are not earning 15,000. 201.65 shillings. They're not. They're earning way below that. When we look at domestic workers, there are very few who are earning 15,000 and above. There are very few who work on the plantations, the farms, those who are then producing in large numbers for export, who come in like worker bees and leave. Export processing zones, these individuals, very few of them are earning above 10,000 shillings a month, just like Rose mentioned.
Yes.
How are we working to see, even at the very least, if 1,000 shillings per year or per period is added to what they earn? How?
One of the tasks that COTU does is to make sure that the workers' voice is to negotiate for the workers' voice. So what happens to the domestic worker? We all live with domestic workers. And it's true, because of the economic challenges that we are going through, we can't be able to afford to pay them the minimum of even of the wage is saying. So what happens? COTU is there for us. That is why we negotiate, and that is why the Secretary General will always come in every time to say that as we have gazetted the minimum wage, we need employers. As we are the employers, we need them to implement. We can't push the employer to implement, but it's to urge. That is why we call it collectively. That is why we say of social dialogue. We keep on seeking for social dialogue. And if we seek social dialogue, all these things will be implemented.
Let me create a picture.
Allow me to come in for the issue of domestic workers. If you can remember, last year during Labor Day, when the president declared 6%, he also made a declaration that we need to ratify Convention 190 and Convention 189. Convention 189 is a domestic workers convention that was adopted in the year 2011 in Geneva in International Labour Convention. Why was the president declaring a ratification of this convention? Basically, ratification is domestication of this convention. It is because there are employers who really underpay this cadre of domestic workers. And remember, we now have a union. Gudea Union now represent domestic workers. And that is how we fought for domestication of this convention. And we approached the president and said, look, when you declare minimum wages, the employers do not honor minimum wages because, in essence, if you look at labor laws, there should be no discrimination against a worker because of the state of work that they do. ILO Convention number 100 speaks of equal remuneration, meaning it should be equal pay for work of equal value. If there are domestic workers earning 15,000, 16,000, 17,000, why should we have a domestic worker earning 5,000? Or even some people bringing relatives and saying, you will do my domestic work, but I will not pay you. So that is how now COTU comes in. Because COTU participated in the negotiation at the International Labour Conference of this convention and is saying we need to domesticate Convention 189 so that domestic workers can be paid minimum wages. And minimum wages is not for only workers in the private sector or public sector. It is for all workers in Kenya, regardless of the state of work that they do.
So there has been conversation around the minimum wage, especially for domestic workers, where one would argue, let me paint a picture. Fine, the government wants me to pay 15,201, but the domestic worker lives with me. So they do not pay rent. I cater for that. I feed them. If they're sick, I take them to hospital. So all these things I will remove from the basic wage. How do you handle such conversations when it comes to you?
Let me address the issue of, and I will address it wholesomely.
Yes.
But when you say when the domestic worker is sick, I take them to the hospital, what does labor law says about medication for your worker? Whether a domestic worker, a public worker, or a private sector worker, the employer needs to take responsibility of their medical expenses. That is key. Two, and again, with the social protection flaws that we have, every employer must deduct. Initially, it was NHIF, but today it is SHA. We encourage all domestic workers to register with SHA, which was former National Hospital Insurance Fund, so that they can pay for their hostels. They can walk in and out of hostel without even consulting the employer to pay for them, because you already pay, just in the same way we pay in the regular employment. So that is a requirement. Just in the same way we also say, if you have a domestic worker working for you, you need to pay for National Social NSSF.
Yeah.
They need to pay a portion. You also need to pay a portion for their retirement, because these people will get old. They will not be able to work in your farm or in your house anymore. How are they going to live after their retirement? So what we are saying is that 15,000 that we are talking of, the housing allowance is at 15%. So if you are providing a house, you don't provide the 15%. It is very clear in law. So it is not an added burden to the employer, but we must follow the law to the letter. The issue of 15% housing allowance, if my domestic worker works in my house, I will pay the minimum wage as stipulated in the labor laws, but I will also make sure that I give accommodation. Yeah? Mm-hmm. And this domestic worker is a human being like any other human being.
So you're saying essentially these things to be provided in addition to the 15,000 and odd such. So you can't now say that I will pay you less 15,000 because I'm providing you with accommodation.
You know, the 15,000 is the minimum wage payment. But if you read that minimum wage gazettement, it also provides for a additional 15% house allowance. So if I pay you this 15,000, I will not pay you house allowance because I've done what? I have given you a house. I've given you accommodation, a place to live.
Yes.
You only pay house allowance when there is no accommodation provided by the employer.
Okay.
But when the accommodation is provided by the employer, you don't pay the 15% because it is meant for paying for their house rent.
Maybe to talk up on that, we have Convention 189, which covers most the domestic workers. And when you read keenly on that, it addresses the issue of discrimination. I'm looking at this scenario where we are in the office, those people who work in the office, they are provided with tea. Do the tea is covered in the salary? Is it deducted in the salary? So when you're talking about the C189, where we should not discriminate the domestic worker, we should provide for them. When they are staying with us, we should give them food, we should give them tea, even the accommodation. Because even as at our workplaces, some of the benefits that employees enjoy, they're those ones, but they are not cut at the salary. Yes.
Let me ask this question, even as we go on to a break. These things really sound good. How do you enforce them?
Enforcement is a challenge if we do not ratify the conventions that speaks about them. Because ratification of these conventions would mean domestication.
Yes.
You will have no option but to implement if it is domesticated. So this is why we are urging the government to ratify Convention 189 on domestic workers so that it can be domesticated and employers can implement to the latter. This should not leave out Convention 190 on ending violence and harassment against men and women in the world of work. Because most of these domestic workers are really harassed at their workplaces. Some of them do not even have offs. Some of them work up to midnight, and some of them undergo a lot of sexual harassment even by their male employers. But nobody speaks to this. So if we ratify these two conventions, it would then mean that it is domesticated and you have no reason to not implement.
What would a ratification process look like for this one particularly?
The ratification process is a bit tedious because we have to do the gaps analysis, look at the country's preparedness to ratify this convention, look at financial implications, generally look at the gaps within the laws. But this is basically done by the government of Kenya in collaboration with the Central Organization of Trade Unions and Federation of Kenya Employers through National Labour Board, advice to the Cabinet Secretary. And this we have done, and the President had declared ratification of this convention. And today, being the Workers' Day, we are calling upon the President once again to instruct ratification of this convention, because a lot has been done in regards to this ratification. It has been disseminated by both employers and employees, and I believe the best thing for us to do is to ratify this convention as fast as we can, so that we can end violence and harassment against men and women in their places of work, but also make sure that there is no discrimination and violation of workers' rights, those who are domestic workers.
There is always some realities that we face in this country, and we can have wonderful laws, but those realities run interference. One of them is poverty. Because very many people in this country are poor and people move into towns in the hope that they'll get a better living, we see the squalor and the condition where some people, fellow citizens, live. That isn't because they've decided that that's how they want to live, but that's the only thing they can do to survive. And partly, it is also as a result of what they earn. Even if there is a CBA and there's a bargaining agreement that covers the work they do, the employers are able to circumvent it because they know the workers will accept those minimum wages that are way below what is stipulated. Whether you're talking about domestic workers, whether you're talking about watchmen, it is. And these individuals form a very, very large population of those who are employed in this country. It is an extremely difficult task to enforce this. And yet, some of these people are members of COTU. How do you go around this? How do you give them a fair shake? Because this is the population of individuals who actually require protection more than many others.
It is true what you are saying, but I also want to tell you that most of these workers who are underpaid, even below minimum wage, most of them are not members of COTU. Why? Because COTU has 47 affiliates. Those are trade unions that represent workers in different sectors. All these trade unions has a role and a responsibility to negotiate for better terms of employment of these workers. When we talk of better terms, we mean they negotiate for their salaries, they negotiate for leaves, they negotiate for maternity protection, they negotiate for lactation stations in the workplaces, and they negotiate for safety and health at workplaces. I mean, there can never be a trade union, and by law, if a trade union has not negotiated for a collective bargaining agreement for 2 years, that union is liable for deregistration. What am I saying? We all negotiate for better terms and conditions of employment for our members. And the members that will lobby the government to adjust their minimum wage, most of them are those workers who are not on a collective bargaining agreement. Like the domestic workers that we are talking of, we make sure that we urge the government to adjust their salaries. And then the Ministry of Labor has a jurisdiction to fully execute the implementation of minimum wages as gazetted by the government of Kenya. If they sleep on the job, that's up to them. But they have the responsibility to execute. It is the Ministry of Labor. You know, that is execution. But COTU then takes up litigation cases to court to make sure that these employers are compelled to pay minimum wages to their workers. When we talk of poverty in this country, why are we poor? Kenya should be a rich country.
Kenya is a rich country.
And Kenya should be the richest. Let me say it should be the richest because of what we have in this country, the minerals that we have. We need to be the richest in Africa. But that is not the case. Why? Because we have corrupt leaders, people who are selfish, people who want to carry Kenya on their back. They want everything to be for themselves. But if our resources are distributed equally, then this country should not lament on poverty. But let me also tell you something. If you look at the theme for COTU this year, it is self-reliance is the key to economic growth. Why do we talk of self-reliance? If we can promote buy Kenya, sell Kenya, you know, we would be rich in this country. But we want to rely on imports. We are not looking at the market. We are not doing analysis on the market challenges. Because when we rely on imports, there are market dynamics there will be competition in cheap imports. And you know, is Kenya becoming a dumping site where all cheap imports should be brought so that they are dumped here?
So we're already there.
We reached there quite a while ago.
Yes. So when we lament of poverty, I am wondering, Kenya is the only country where you wake up in the morning and that poorest woman has a home, has a cow, has a garden to plow, and we still lament of poverty.
But this is the thing that you speak about implementation.
Yes.
Whether we're talking about the implementation, when you talk about ratification of these conventions, and that there will be implementation agents, which in the cases that you've mentioned, ministries, departments under those ministries, that has been the problem, that we have a perennial issue with the implementation metrics. It doesn't matter what we're looking at. So when you look at implementation as consent ratification of a certain convention, and who's going to make sure that workers are earning at least 15,000 shillings, who's going to do that? It's the same idea when we talk about now. When you're saying that let's implement some policies, let's implement, it's the same symptoms of the disease that's running through and through. So what's the problem when it comes to implementation? Because even this thing that we're talking about now, making sure that every worker is earning 15,000 shillings, it's implementation.
Yes, it's implementation.
We'll be talking about it for years on end.
It is because we have,
and there will still be people who are earning 6,000 shillings a month.
Because we have stubborn employers who does not regard the law, because the law is very clear. The minimum wage has been gazetted. Your work as an employer is to implement, and the Ministry of Labour must come out strongly to make sure that they execute the gazetted minimum wages by taking these employers to court for violation of the gazette notice that has been gazetted. You know, like I'm saying, when we ratify conventions, we domesticate them. And when it becomes law, it is a law. You cannot violate the law. And the law should not only be for the poor and not for the rich. Because if we take these employers to court for failure to implement gazette notices, the other employers will follow suit. You know? But if we leave them...
How often are they taken to court, and how often are the cases that are taken to court won?
We do. And it is to a large extent. Even before going to court, if you just report a dispute at the Ministry of Labour, whose role is to execute that minimum wage implementation, the employer will be compelled to pay. And if they refuse to pay, the ministry will write a certificate of disagreement, which will then go to Employment and Labour Relations Court. And let me tell you for sure, and you can go and find it out, the recommendation from the Ministry of Labour is upheld in the Employment and Labour Relations Court, because that is the procedure, and you cannot violate the law. The judge will not violate the law. So the employers must be compelled to implement the minimum wages.
Yeah. So we speak about this issue with the people who, first of all, just get to work because there has been referral. Not to come to a kazi, talk to someone, and they bring them in. But there is a need for us to have this conversation in a structured way, such that every employer should be compelled to have a contract with the domestic worker, so that the domestic worker knows what it is they're getting into, an employer knows what it is they're getting themselves into. And just how critical as well would it be for the domestic workers or the people you say are not covered by CBAs to at least belong to a union that collectively speaks on their behalf and champions their ideas, Jane?
My sister said we have affiliates who we are all affiliates connected to COTU. So that means every employee of Kenya should be covered in any affiliate. That said, we need maybe the only thing that Kenyans need to be sensitized on is maybe the informal sectors who don't belong to any union, who don't know that they are supposed to belong to a union, and that is they don't know their rights. So every employee, irrespective if you are self-employed, if you're not self-employed, you will need to belong to a union. And that is why you can see that we have gig economy. Where are they belonging? We have a union that represents them now. Yeah, we have a union, and that union is affiliated to COTU. So those gig economies, those are young people who are now self-employed. Currently, right now, they are working at home. They need first to know that they are represented in COTU. Their union is represented as an affiliate of COTU. Hence, when you're talking of the minimum wage, they are covered.
Okay.
Yes.
Can you trace for us the developments that have happened over time with the support that COTU has granted to then see that these things have changed? Even if it's over a 5-year trajectory, can we see that with the support of COTU, we have seen that things have changed and that they've moved or they've progressed? What was some milestones that you see that would have been crossed to show that, okay, actually, yes, when you talk about COTU now representing, dropping your own, looking towards the welfare of the worker, and we can see that things significantly have changed over time?
One of them is the gig economy.
Yes.
That one for sure, I'll say that it's one thing that we all working digitally. That is one thing that is a milestone that has come a long way, but now it's a reality that you have a union that is representing the gig economy. Secondly, it's COTU having policies and structures that are representing the worker. And also we've seen the issue of the minimum wage. For a very long time, we've seen that a lot has been happening. The minimum wage has been discussed, but the implementation stage has not worked. But of late, we've seen for years that we've lived, we've seen that the current employee, especially the unskilled one, they're almost earning the mark of the minimum wage, which is the truth. And those people are affiliate of COTU. Those people are the members of COTU. But the way my sister said, if you're not a member of the COTU, then we're not supposed even to discuss you. Yes.
And contract, whether signed or verbal, whether written or verbal, is a contract. And if I employ you and I don't give you a written contract, you are an employee because I've given you a verbal contract. And I need to adhere with the law. Domestic workers are members of KUDEA union. They are represented. And KUDEA is also an affiliate of International Domestic Workers Union, internationally. And the chair comes from KUDEA. The international chair for international domestic workers comes from KUDEA. And KUDEA has recruited most of these domestic workers with written contracts and even those without written contracts. And they are represented effectively. Their voices are represented. And some employers have been compelled to sign contract with the employers, or with the employees, so that they can be paid minimum wage. So what am I saying? I am saying that if you are a domestic worker out there, look for KUDEA. You will be represented, whether you have a written contract or not, because the freedom of association is there. And that is why we fought for the Bill of Rights in the Kenyan Constitution, so that every worker must be given, their rights must be respected. Yeah.
Where does COTU come in when it regards, issues then where we talk about for real employment, and maybe when someone has been relieved of their duties for whatever reason, and you find that there was some kind of malpractice involved and maybe somebody has to go to court? Does COTU have a role to play here, whereby the protection of this person's job then is brought into play?
Yes, COTU has a role. And let me draw your attention to Industrial Relations Charter. It has given the employer the right to terminate your services, but in accordance with the law.
With the law, okay.
So if it is unlawful termination, the Act speaks about it. Then we have the unions that represent these members, who would then write to the employer and seek to get clarification of why this particular worker's contract has been terminated. COTU comes in policy issues more than handling disputes at the workplace.
Okay.
Because we have relevant unions that has a role, that has signed a recognition agreement with these employers that they will work on terms and conditions of these employers. So that is not COTU's role to go to the industry and to defend workers who are terminated, because their unions are there to do that. But when it comes to the workers who are not members of the union, COTU has a department where such workers can go and say their grievances with their employers. And COTU has a legal representative, a lawyer, that represent this category of workers. And the lawyer would go to Employment and Labor Relations Court and would take up this matter, because these are not workers who are members of a particular union. So, but when it comes to policy formulation, then COTU takes an upper hand, because then COTU advocates for more policy regulations than the trade unions who work on disputes at the workplace and who work together with the Ministry of Labor to handle such disputes. So we have roles and responsibilities that also has boundaries. So don't expect COTU to come and handle a dispute in my union while I am there as the general secretary of that particular union. I should do my work. But if it is over me and I need aid, then I have to invite COTU now to come and help me in that regard.
So you talk about ratification of C-189 as pronounced by President William Ruto as he was giving the 6% increment. And I'm assuming the ratification of the same should be championed by the government. But ever since he gave that ratification, the government he leads has been silent on the same.
No, it's not right. The government has not been silent on the same. The government has done a lot of work. There has been formation of different committees in regards to that. It has also been brought to the National Labour Board, where I also sit as a workers' representative. And it has been discussed to a certain level. It has gone a long way. And right now, as we speak, from 5th of next month, this month, we are already in May. So from 5th of this month, it is going to be under public participation. And once it is out of public participation, it will go to the parliament for discussion, and then it will go to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for depositing at the International Labour Organization. I think a lot of work has been done, and what we are left with is to declare ratification, because the president declared that it should be ratified. The Labour Board has sat to discuss the same. The ministry has done all its work. It has done a gap analysis. It has done so many things. So it is just awaiting ratification. And we are looking forward to ratification very soon. Yeah, it has done its work.
Okay. Jane, we look at a different kind of work. The kaleidoscope has changed a little bit when we're looking now at how people work, especially with the younger generation who now might be attached to an organization, in terms of ensuring that they are able to negotiate better. Does COTU also play an advisory role when it comes to certain things that can you actually come to COTU to get advice on what you should do when it comes to maybe negotiating a position, ensuring that your welfare is taken care of? Does that happen, whereby previously we would just sit and assume things would happen the way they did? but now looking forward, you can do that with little bits of information. Is there an advisory role that COTU plays for folks who are getting into employment?
Yes, COTU has a structure. And in that structure, that is why you can see we have a youth representation, we have women representation with the structure. And with the same structure, we break it down, we have policies now which will guide us and will guide the young people of how they should disseminate their work. And one of the things that COTU has been doing for quite some years now is ensuring that there's youth empowerment. Youth empowerment comes as a result of having a lot of awareness of what COTU is doing for the young people, what COTU is planning to do for the young people in terms of training, in terms of campaigns, in terms of sensitizing young people when they're joining employment, because employment, when a young person joins employment, they find it very difficult to adapt. They don't know their rights. So COTU comes in where they ensure that they empower the young person who is coming into the employment to know their rights, that they will not be discriminated at workplace. They'll know their rights and they'll know what they should be doing at the workplace. So that is the role of COTU, and COTU really has supported the young people and the women in general. Yes.
Is there a union that supports these workers we keep exporting to other countries?
The domestic workers or migrant workers, or which kind of workers are you talking about?
Kazimaju.
Everybody who travels abroad, whether they go as domestic workers, whether they're trained personnel, does COTU have a say?
Yes. COTU has a labor migration center. It is called Labor Migration Center in COTU, where we do pre-departure training for those workers who want to go abroad. We advise them to register with the Ministry of Labor and to know the kind of work that they are doing. They should have a contract. You know, in Labor Migration Center, we bring in even returnees for training, because there are people who come back so traumatized. They went with hope. They came back empty-handed without hope. So where do they go and where do they start? They come to COTU for advice, for training, for counseling, so that they can start a new life here. But for those that are departing Kazi Maju to wherever they are going, we have a labor migration center, full-fledged, with publications. We have booklets published by ILO, published by COTU, and we give a pre-departure training. We get to know the countries that they go to. We get to know the kind of contracts that the country have with them. We get to know the type of work that they do, and we advise them.
Okay. So we're on another Labor Day, another May 1st. There are hopes. We don't know what we'll hear today. You might have an insight into that. But what are you hoping for, and what are we wishing, those who work in this space, from both of you?
Another Labor Day. And remember, this Labor Day, we are also celebrating 60th birthday of COTU. It is a Labor Day that we are looking forward to more goodies from the president, because he is the guest of honor today. And we are happy to welcome him, even as we look for more goodies from him. We want to encourage workers wherever they are to come today in large numbers, prepared to hear good things from us. I'm also saying that it is a Labor Day that we are speaking of self-reliance. And we want to urge the government to look into making sure that we industrialize our country, that the companies that were dead be revived, so that we tuzalishe uchumi yetu. We make sure that we produce our own products. We want to make sure that we enhance manufacturing, so that our people can have jobs, so that we don't have hiyo mambo ya hakuna kazi kwa vijana, hakuna kazi, poverty in Kenya. No more. So we are looking forward to a very colorful and a colorful Labor Day, and the president comes with goodies for the workers.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Yes.
As we celebrate the 60th birthday of COTU, mine is to urge, let the young people come out in large numbers. When the president will be addressing, let the president know that he has the majority of people who are supporting him, who are young people, who are young workers in this country.
Indeed.
And of course, as my sister said, we are looking forward for more goodies,
From the
more
president.
good things for us as workers, because we want to get out of that stadium with smiley faces.
Indeed.
Yes.
Rose Omamo is an executive board member of COTU, with Jane Njoki, who has joined us as a member of the COTU Kenya Youth Committee. Thank you, both of you, for being here, and happy Workers' Day.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.